following is an interview with Rocco Surace. Rocco is the co-author of Throughput Economics. He's a CPA who has had a 50-year career in various branches of the accounting profession, including tax, audit, and management accounting. Well, thank you for agreeing to join me. I wrote down some talking points, but I don't think we really need to stick to them rigidly. I think once we get into the subject matter, we'll find plenty to talk about. I do want to mention right up front that you wrote a book that precedes mine called Throughput Economics, which covers the same ideas. I would say, and I hope you don't see this as an insult, I would say from a more academic perspective.
Sure. I can see why you would say that, but it's definitely lengthier than I ever thought it was going to be. You know, my co-authors, L.A. Schagenheim and Henry Camp, I kept pushing for brevity.
Yeah.
But they wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of some significant examples.
They wanted precision.
Well, really, what would be typically faced in a company in making a decision and transforming the mind to think the direction should be profit-based, not whatever other reasons you might have, whether it be the local efficiencies, whether it be, just local optima besides the local efficiencies. Just so they just wanted to get in that level of detail. So we did it. They were really, you would think the accountant was responsible for those chapters. I wasn't.
Okay.
Ellie did one example, the daily bread, and Henry took the lead on the other example, the Choco, I forget what, the chocolate factory. And I was the, editor and proofreader to make sure it made accounting sense. Mm-hmm. Right. But my main purpose that drew my interest initially with when Ellie Schagenheim asked me about my interest was this would be an opportunity to teach the world what throughput is, another opportunity. There's been plenty of effort there, but we're going to take an approach of not just speaking about it academically, but through real life examples, So it delves into it. I can understand why you would say it's more academic. It could be a textbook.
It's certainly more exhaustive. I mean, I think the little book or booklet would be a more apt description that I've written is designed to be a sales tool. It's designed to be more of a manifesto than it is a exhaustive treatment of the subject matter. I don't talk about investment, for example. I don't even mention it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I need to. I mean, you've already written.
Yeah, let me tell you why I agree with you, Justin. I'm coming out with not a sequel, but the number one request I get from people, particularly at our conferences, right, is you got anything you can give me so I can work with it? Yeah. And I do, right? But they're mainly in the form of Excel spreadsheets, right? Let me get rid of this phone call. And some other templates, but I haven't committed it yet fully to a workbook, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the storytelling, brief stories, and then it's going to refer to sections of the book, not all sections. Yeah. And then give the template example so people can put it in place. Yeah. Let me give you one very small example of where it could have a profound impact. In the world of mergers and acquisitions, just using that fancy phrase, there is always an incredible amount of money either left on a table or unrealized, by the sellers, or if the buyers knew where that hidden money was, they keep their mouth shut and realize it when they take the company. Well, I got some pretty simple templates to expose where that money is, mm-hmm. Right? And it's definitive. That's a real brief example how not even examples of, should I make chocolate 1 or chocolate 2, whatever. I forgot what specific examples we used in the book, but it's even a higher level than that. So that's a long-winded answer to I agree with you, right? So I've taken what people have requested of me, and we're going to have an accompanying workbook to go with the book.
Excellent.
That's more hands-on and brief.
So let's wind back and start with the essential difference between. Well, actually, I'll make a statement, and you can agree and disagree, or disagree, and then we can talk about how to frame the subject matter. I would say that what we're concerned with here today is management accounting, or the method behind management decision making, rather than accounting in its totality.
Add to your sentence and how it's used. Yeah.
Yeah, I think neither you nor I would have a.
There's an assumption.
I would have a beef.
Yeah.
Neither you nor I would have a beef with financial accounting. We're not here to criticize that.
No. It has a very specific purpose.
Yep, it's a well-developed field. Yep. So it's not fair to say that either of us are at war with cost accounting, because cost accounting is a I guess a method of analysis that can be used for both financial accounting and management decision making. Our argument, I think both of us would agree, it's an inappropriate tool to be used for making forward-looking decisions.
True, but let's be a little bit more specific. It's cost accounting as recognized by general accepted accounting principles around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You will do this in your cost accounting, follow these rules. Okay? Even in the throughput world, there's cost accounting. It's just how are you recognizing the cost? So in the financial sense, it's cost accounting according to general accepted accounting principles, according to US rules and then worldwide rules, right? So
yeah,
just
so I might be wrong, but if somebody said, what's the essential characteristic of cost accounting, I would say the allocation of indirect costs to either transactions or to some other unit of the organization, component of the organization. So the essence is the allocation bit, not the fact that we're concerned about costs. It's that we go to the trouble of allocating costs so as to be able to infer or to assume that units of the organization generate profit rather than the organization as a whole.
Yes, there's nothing in veil about what you said. I could just add to it. That's all.
Mm. And I think you and I would both agree that units of the organization don't generate profit. Only the organization as a whole generates profit.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
The problem with the units discussion is, to use a very simple example, this year it might be 10,000 units. Next year it might be 15,000 units. So it looked like you produced cheaper next year. Did you?
No.
Right. Because you spread it over 15,000 units, not 10,000 units.
Yeah. So in almost any other context, when we're dealing with a complex system, nobody would even want to make the assumption that accountants make. So, for example, I used Formula One as an example. If you went and hung with the mechanics in a Formula One team, you wouldn't expect to overhear them having conversations about the lap times of components of the vehicle. They wouldn't sit and look at a pair of brake calipers and ask themselves, what lap times can these calipers do? It would clearly be a nonsense discussion. But the minute we start allocating indirect costs to transactions, we're doing it for a very specific purpose. We want to put ourselves in a position where we can have a discussion that's an analog to, lap times for calipers. We want to talk about how much profit this transaction generates, or how much profit this customer generates, or this project generates.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem strange in the context of a business to have that conversation, but it would seem strange if we were mechanics, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's really no difference, right? It's what you're producing, right? It's units of output.
Mm.
In Formula One, it's laps on a track, right?
Fast laps.
Yeah. So the assumption that the strong assumption that is throughout this is that whatever you are delivering to your customer, that unit of output consumes costs. That's the major assumption that's made, and it's just not true, right? You use the word allocate.
Yes.
But by definition, if you allocate, that means it consumed the cost.
Yes.
That's where the allocation side starts to lose steam, right?
Yes. If you didn't make the unit, it's not like the costs all of a sudden weren't consumed.
There you go. It's there anyway.
Yeah.
That's my 10,000 versus 15,000 example.
Yeah. And the scary thing is it's so unnecessary. Like mechanics don't suffer as a consequence of being able to being unable to assign a lap time to a set of brake calipers. It doesn't do them any injury at all. They can they can carry on perfectly fine without it. Yeah. I think that what I think we're dealing. My guess is we're dealing with inertia. I think if you go back in history where indirect costs were a very small percentage of total costs, it was a convenience that you could get away with probably. But in the modern organization, indirect costs are by far the greatest component of total cost.
So very true. So very true. Most people would be, I shouldn't say most, but many people would probably be surprised, like what the cost of labor is as a percentage of total costs, indirect and direct, in the making of an automobile. Right. It's very, including benefits, fully loaded, right? It's way under, I don't know what it is today, but I can tell you 10 years ago, it was way under 10%, depending on the manufacturer, right? Everybody thinks, oh, cost of labor, UAW contracts and all that, blah, blah, blah. Well, as one person I heard say once, he said, that war has already been fought and won. Why are you still there?
Yeah, well, I think the problem is that when you shift from indirect costs being a small percentage of total costs to a large percentage of total costs, all of a sudden the organization becomes much more complex. The dynamics of the organization become harder to understand. And I think that what seems to happen with cost accounting is we start off by saying, let's assume that complexity doesn't exist and assign indirect costs to transactions, let's say. And then obviously we end up with all these sorts of errors. The classic one is the selling bubble gum on the counter of the diner. The cost accounting would argue that it doesn't add to profitability to do so because the bubble gum machine doesn't even pay for its real estate. So you have all these errors, which are stupid errors, and obvious errors. So then there's a requirement to kind of try and smuggle back in an appreciation for the complex dynamics of the organization with more complex allocation, like activity-based costing and other exotic allocation methods.
I got trained by the best I got trained by the people who invented it, activity-based costing. Still. The lead on the project, still a very good friend of mine, lives in Dallas, Texas. Let me put it this way. I never did an activity-based costing project. I did an activity-based management project, right? Here's what I mean by that. I didn't believe in activity-based costing, right? That was way before I met Ellie Goldratt too. But I did, at that time, I was already into the process world as opposed to departmental silos, right? So that gave me a way to help my clients understand the cost of end-to-end processes of serving their customers. That made more sense. Okay. So I've done a few of those projects, but I can tell you, out of all those projects I did, only one made sense in from the point of view it achieved what I was brought in for. It was an international company. It was a Fortune 100 company. And they wanted a fairer way. They knew it wasn't exact. They just wanted a fair way to allocate the cost of the global purchasing services to all the manufacturing plants around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I understood their logic. They were all arguing, you're charging me for this and I don't use it. It's just so we developed an activity-based system that was consumption-based. How a manufacturing plant in Indonesia might use the global purchasing function, that's when they got their share of the costs, right? So out of all
But
the
why did
activity-based
I
costing,
guess costs had to be allocated to them. I think in the TOC world, we would argue, well, why allocate costs at all? But in a case
oh,
like that,
right.
you have to for,
Oh, yeah. I'm saying it, but that's the only one I did where their objectives made sense. They just want to eliminate the argument, right?
yeah,
That's all. No,
yeah.
they didn't need to at all,
Mm,
right? You actually, when companies do that, you lose the ability to manage the function itself because on the internal reports, their costs disappear.
mm.
They go to the rest of the company, right?
Well, we're working with an organization now that's been very acquisitive. They've acquired 50 or 60 organizations, and each of them operates, how traditionally has operated independently, and they've been making the transition towards more of a enterprise model. But up until this point, what's happened is each operator gets a profit and loss. But as they transition to more of an enterprise model, what happens is more and more functions are provided by head office. So now what's necessary, obviously, is you need transfer pricing because you have to be able to pass on, head office expenses to the regions so that their P&Ls make sense. But then the other thing that's happened is they've
That, that's
acquired.
a, that's an assumption, right?
That's their assumption, right? Yeah,
Their
I don't
assumption,
agree with
yes.
it any more than you do. The other thing that's happened is they've acquired companies that are service providers to the other companies. Um,
Mm.
and now, of course, in order for their P&Ls to make sense, um, you need transfer pricing. You need these organizations to buy, you need these divisions to buy and sell from one another. And now, of course, we have a situation where some of them are not buying at all, and as a consequence are less productive than they otherwise would be, or they're choosing to buy the product but buy it from external vendors
And
because
the
it's too
internal cost
expensive
never
to
goes
buy it
away.
internally. Yeah, yeah. So you have so you have the P&L, which was intended to, I guess, simplify the management of the organization. But then you have this superstructure of transfer pricing that has to be built and maintained in order for the P&L to make sense. So the question is, have we achieved a net increase in simplicity, or have we just created a, you know, an,
Well, my advice to them would be first, take a step back and why does transfer pricing exist? The only place you really need transfer pricing is if you're selling from one country to another. So you want to deploy transfer pricing to pay the lowest net worldwide tax,
sure,
right? That's the only real reason. The other transfer, so you got to
yeah,
challenge
and
the need.
but that's financial accounting, not management accounting.
Right. That's and primarily tax accounting, but
Yeah,
it ends up being financial as
it's
well.
retrospective.
Yeah, yeah. So the other, it's to challenge the assumption. And again, how I would challenge the assumption is that here's the before transfer pricing, here's the after. Look at the ability you lost to manage the original P&L because you've bastardized the P&L by putting this cost in 50 other divisions,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
You've
the
actually
assumption I
lost the
challenged when I
ability.
first met them is I said, why does this organization have multiple P&Ls? It's one company. There should be one P&L for the company as a whole. And of course, the argument is, well, the managers of the divisions, how do they manage if they don't have a P&L? And to my mind, the answer is ridiculously simple. We want them to maximize one parameter, and there's a bunch of other parameters we want them to maintain within range. And the ones we want them to maintain within range, we'll call them necessary conditions, and the parameter we want them to maximize, we'll call that the goal. And the definition of necessary conditions is if it's not within range, your achievement of the goal isn't valid. If you keep them within range and you're producing more of the goal, then you're doing better. And there's no requirement for P&L, and there's no requirement to ever use the word profit in the context of an
A
operating
division.
company.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve any
Well,
problem.
well, what I've done there is I've done it more a couple times by division, but most of the time it's by distinct product lines, distinct markets. Okay. So there you can get the throughput, the actual the pure throughput definition. And if there are any costs, you can call them indirect. I'll just plain old English call them operating expense that are literally caused. They're not a throughput cost because they're more of a period cost, but you wouldn't have that cost without that product line, let's say, okay? Might be attorney's fees or something, right? Then that's in that division's management reports. I won't call them a P&L, I'll call them management report. So that's it. That was our solution.
Yeah.
So now here's what we did. We gave that division lead the ability to manage their profitability.
Oh, it's interesting. So what we've done with this organization is we have suggested to them that all costs, all indirect costs, are ultimately the responsibility of head office. However, there are two categories of indirect costs. There are the ones that are centrally managed, and there are the ones that are managed by the operating companies. And what we've said is for the operating companies, one of the parameters they have to maintain within range is the ratio of locally managed indirect costs relative to revenue.
There you go. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So no P&L, but we do pay attention to the operating costs that they directly control.
A great manager wants in front of them what they can control.
Yep.
Don't measure me if I can't control it.
Yep.
You know, that's what they want. So that's accomplishing that. That's great.
So let's get a little more academic. I'm not an accountant, as you know, so it's been I've had sort of an onlooker's interest in throughput accounting. I got to know Thomas Corbett pretty well just after he wrote Throughput Accounting.
Mm-hmm.
And him and I had a number of interesting conversations. I think he wrote that as his thesis. I think it fell out of his thesis.
Could have been. I mean, the last time I think he and I saw each other once, and that was the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him since. Yeah.
Yeah. He went back to Brazil. So I've had a sort of an onlooker's fascination with it. And over the years, it started to dawn on me that all is not well in the TOC community with throughput accounting. My major concern is it's poorly named, because the term throughput accounting creates the immediate implication that we're trying to replace accounting with some new TOC-based version of accounting, and we're not. It's management decision-making that we're interested in, not the whole accounting body of knowledge. So that's why I started to delve into it. And I've made all of these fascinating discoveries that I think probably every accountant knows already. But it's been interesting for me to discover just what a Pandora's box this is. And I'll share a couple of them with you. Here's the first one, and I'd love to hear your comment. There's a standard profit formula that everybody knows. Profit equals revenue minus cost. Or if you've been around organizations a bit longer, you might say profit equals, contribution margin minus cost, or gross profit minus operating cost. So then you might acknowledge there's two types of costs. But basically, the formula is profit equals revenue minus cost. The interesting thing about that formula is that it only applies to the past. You cannot use that formula to support a management decision. That formula is invalid. And the reason it's invalid is that profit equals revenue minus cost, the way it's written implies that revenue and cost are independent variables.
Independent variables, okay.
They move independently, but they don't. If we took a simple business like a restaurant and we said profit equals revenue minus cost, and we said we have costs of $10,000 a week, and we reduce the costs, then profit might go up. But if we reduce them again and again and again, at some point profit would go down.
Mhm.
So the formula is wrong. Given that the purpose of math is to model reality, this is simply bad math. If we're trying to make a forward-looking decision, profit is not revenue minus cost. We could say profit is a function of revenue and cost, but we cannot say profit equals revenue minus cost because we're not modeling the dynamics of the organization accurately with that formulation. It is not true to say that if you reduce costs, profit goes up any more than it is to say if you increase revenue, profit goes up. Because if you increase revenue and hold costs static, sooner or later, profits will go down.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but to a large degree, like if you say to someone how they're feeling about it, because that's what's running through my mind is multiple scenarios. It's their environment. Okay. Uh, let me give you one quick example. The environments that I go in that is a heavy inventory distribution type environment. Okay.
Yep. Which is where we work too, mostly.
Okay. So one of the reasons, one of the expectations when I get introduced to somebody, you got to talk to Rocco. Okay, I go. I always say, why am I here? Right. One of the expectations is I'm going to help them lower their inventory.
Yep.
So I try to bring them on an educational process to make them realize that our true road, if you're successful, for the first year or two, your inventory is going to go up. Okay, because here's what's going to happen. We're going to replace your fast movers faster than you're replacing them now. And your slow movers are going to still be there. So your inventory is going to go up. But what will go up is your inventory turnover.
Yep.
All right. So our goal is not to lower inventory. It's to increase the velocity of the inventory through your warehouse.
Yep.
Right. Just right down the road for me, Amazon is building their second largest warehouse in the country. Right. That's just a great example. It's a behemoth. It's
Yep.
8 stories high, huge floors.
Robots.
You really think Amazon bought that to store a lot of inventory?
No.
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 It's going to be moving so fast through there. It's all robotics and all that good stuff. But that's the point. So, that's one example of right.
Well, actually, now you're getting to what I would argue is the right definition of profit. I would argue that, and this, you've come across this. I would say profit is the difference between two rates: the rate at which the organization generates throughput and the rate at which it accrues operating expenses.
Yeah, yeah. Therefore, the TOC formula, I'll call it that, is delta T less delta OE. If that's a positive, you're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, how well do you want to manage that? Right?
Yeah.
So,
but the point I think is that I think sometimes in the TOC world we're immune to the magnitude of the little things. Like if we're making a decision about what we're going to do tomorrow, profit does not equal revenue minus cost. Profit equals the difference between the rate at which we accrue throughput or contribution margin and the rate at which we accrue or generate throughput and the rate at which we accrue operating expenses. It sounds like a trivial distinction, but it's not a trivial distinction.
I agree.
It's a massive distinction.
I agree. As far as looking tomorrow, again, my mind continually goes now to what makes this simple. Tomorrow is all about just increase the flow.
Yep.
You increase the flow, the costs will take care of themselves, right? For the most part. You'll see what's slowing you down that you don't need to spend money on. You'll quit spending that money.
Yeah.
That's just purely logical. So, that's again.
So
it's
I'm a marketing guy. I'm not the first to realize that, profit's the difference between two rates. And obviously everyone in the TOC community knows that. There must be folks in the accounting profession, particularly academic folks, who have a deep understanding, a profound understanding of the dynamics of the organization and who know this stuff too.
Well, they do if they continued their education.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll give you one very simple example. I'm going back in the day where Ellie did the satellite program. Remember the eight sessions where he wanted to teach the world what, right? So I regave the sessions off of videotape. I had Ellie's permission. I was the first one he allowed to do it at a local university. And I invited the professors to attend, and a lot of them did. We did the distribution session, okay? And Ellie, it's still, no one's ever repeated the simplicity at which he explained supply chain distribution in that session. It's phenomenal. Anyway, I do that. So it's, 3 hours by the time we're done with Q&A. The leading logistics professor, he said, you just invalidate everything I teach my students on inventory stocking replenishment. He says, you invalidated it all. Right? Why? Because Ellie teaches replenishment based, not forecast and min-max and all that. Right? So that's what he's teaching. He's teaching forecast-based, min-max, and optimize all that, right? So very simple example. Right?
The other thing I realized is that...
very simple example of I'm sorry, I should have completed the sentence. He had not yet furthered his education into the demand replenishment world.
Yeah.
This is 20 years ago now, so he's there now. I know he is.
So if you went and sat with somebody who had a PhD in management decision making or something, that obviously they know all this stuff that we're talking about. I have seen folks in LinkedIn in the comments comment that when they studied accounting, they were warned not to use cost allocation for management decision making. So, but in spite of that, what your average accountant seems to do is to use more and more exotic forms of cost allocation to try and mitigate the problems inherent in cost allocation. There must be folks in the accounting profession who recognize that trying to replace bad math with more exotic bad math is not the best way to do math.
I agree. So here's my comment on that. 100% of the time, I did a lot of these in my 50 years. They're still trying to do something with 100% of the costs. Understand the conflict that raises?
Yeah.
Still trying to do something in these a cost has got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
No.
Right? You know when that first came to light to me? I was out of school only 4 years, and I got to attend my first multi-divisional company. And I got invited by the president to, okay, I want you to come to the meeting because we want some help with all my division managers. And the division, their most profitable division, this was heavy manufacturing. It was our, aluminum castings. This division, they did iron casting, aluminum, all that, right? Good old fashioned manufacturing. You're scared when you walk through the place. You see molten metal pouring, right? But this guy was consistently the most profitable division, and he had all G&A costs allocated to him. They did it based on divisional sales dollars. They figured the more sales incurred, the more administrative support needed, whether it's billing, payables, you know what I mean? If you got more sales, you must have bought more product. Therefore, you should absorb more of the accounts payable and purchasing costs and down the line. And he said, this is nuts. The better I do, I take on everybody else's costs. And I'd never thought about that, right? I'm just 2-3 years out of school. And my cost accounting course says, no, you got to allocate this and just pick a fair method to allocate.
Yeah.
Right? So even sticking on the fair, this guy said, it ain't fair. Just because I got the most sales, right? So that was really the beginning of the
But
meeting.
you could track it all back down to the poor use of terminology. I mean, if I was in that meeting, the first thing I'd say to your guy, that guy, is your division doesn't generate profit. It's a division. The company creates profit. So let's stop talking about profit. And if we
I
stop
wish I was
talking
smart.
about,
I
yeah, if
wish I
we
was that
stop
smart
talking,
back then.
well, you were 19, but
Hmm.
you have to have years
24.
of experience being rude to people in the executive suite in order to be comfortable being rude to people in the, that's not a skill that comes naturally.
Oh, I agree. I agree. You got to know you got to be like a football coach. You got to know which ones you can do that to and which ones you can't.
But there's this stubborn. It's like a survivor from the Titanic clinging to a piece of furniture. There's this dogged reliance on the idea that profits are generated in different places within an organization. Profitable divisions, profitable customers, profitable projects. I hear profitable projects all the time, and profitable branches. And it makes sense if you're Warren Buffett and you're running a holding company, and all the head office does is allocates capital. That terminology makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in an enterprise where you have a bunch of divisions that are meant to be working together to generate profit.
I agree. Like so, the classic example would be the automotive industry, right?
Yeah,
So General Motors still has multiple models, but we got a plant here that supplies all the anything to do with heating and cooling for all models.
yeah. The Ford Bronco doesn't generate profit. It doesn't make sense to say the Bronco is profitable or not profitable. It
Yeah.
generates a contribution to the Ford Motor Company, and the Ford Motor Company is. So you don't actually need the word profit. You could talk about the contribution that it's making without using.
Well, that was my profession's big advancement, right? Contribution margins.
Mm,
And it was supposedly going to take, we'll just stay above the gross profit line and better allocate costs to get a truer contribution margin,
yeah.
right? So,
The other interesting thing that I realized is that if you're making a management decision and you are trying to determine the change in enterprise-wide profitability that will result from this decision, the cost allocation, pretty much all methods, I haven't thought too much about ABC, but the standard cost allocation hides the fact that the, how do I say this correctly? The various set of the set of possible outcomes is bimodal. It's not a normal distribution. So the example I would say is, let's assume a customer comes to you and they buy 20 units a month at X dollars per unit, and they say, if you give me a discount of 15%, instead of buying 20 units a month, I'll buy 200. I'll guarantee to buy 200 units a month. Now, it's easy to do basic arithmetic and determine whether you generate more or less throughput. But of course, the $64 question is, well, what about when we take into account the indirect costs? Now, there are
you're,
two
you're
possible,
describing our you're describing our daily bread example in throughput economics. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So there's two possible likely outcomes. One is that it has no impact whatsoever on operating costs, meaning that decision could be made on a purely marginal basis. The other possibility is that it causes an increase, but if it causes an increase, there's a very real likelihood it causes a major increase. If they have to, in order to process 200 additional orders a month, if they have to add a third shift in production, that could increase operating expenses by tens of thousands of dollars a month or hundreds of thousands of dollars per month.
Yep.
So it turns out if you do the analysis twice based upon each of those scenarios, the impact that the decision has on profitability is either a little bit of additional profit or it plunges the organization into a temporary state of loss.
Yeah, Justin. So what I'll tell you, just again, I'm going to take this opportunity to relate it back. You know, Alan Schagenheim, my co-author, was the first one I heard use the the term. You buy capacity in chunks.
Yeah.
There's no increment. You can't buy incremental capacity unless it's totally outsourced. Like plating or
Well, then
grinding.
it's a totally variable cost.
Yeah, you buy it. Yeah, right. You buy it in chunks. So capacity is always an important consideration if I'm going to take, okay, you promised me 20,000 a month instead of 5,000 a month. You got to look at your capacity. What can you do? And is it going to be just as simple as overtime, or do you need to buy more capacity? Right. So that's what makes throughput economics long in those 2 chapters. It's the capacity considerations.
Yeah. So if the enterprise-wide profit implications of a simple decision, if the range of possibilities is a bimodal distribution rather than a normal distribution or some other kind of distribution, what that means is that cost allocation is a little bit like that saw about having one hand in ice water and another hand in boiling water, and on average being warm. It tells you nothing of any use. I'm writing a script for a video on this, and the example I came up with, it was a difference between, an extra $5,000 a month in profit on one hand, and a reduction in profit by $20,000 a month, let's say, on the other hand. It was completely bimodal. But if you used standard cost accounting would say, well, it would reduce the profitability of the organization by $1,000 a month. That answer is completely useless.
I agree.
It's entirely useless.
Yeah. The story's getting old now, so I don't know if I should use it, but I will with you. So back in the late 70s, where the U.S. automakers said, we got to start making fuel efficient cars. Right. So Chevrolet came out with a pretty popular model, the Chevette. Were you in this country yet when they did the Chevette? Okay.
No.
So
it was a Saturn Solstice had just come out.
Yeah. It was a compact car, but built like a tank.
Yeah.
I mean, my sister had one. I drove it, and I just couldn't believe the weight of it for such a small car. Anyway, the reason they quit making it was it looked like a loser. They sold a lot of units, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, they got allocated corporate and indirect overhead based on units sold, right?
Mm.
I was also, not only that, also the most profitable looking car in all of GM was the Cadillac Eldorado. Coincidentally, the least units sold in the company. It's a very specific luxury car. Very,
Yeah.
So there you go.
I know. Yeah.
But I mean, it's an old example, but that's the point you're making, right? It's irrelevant information. It's actually wrong. Forget about irrelevant. It's actually wrong.
So, in the TOC world, we talk about, and the purpose of the book Ode to Speed is to introduce, I don't want to introduce all of throughput economics, as you guys wisely call it. I just want to introduce the idea of throughput per constraint unit and offer it up as kind of a master key, or what's it called? What was the stone called that you could use to translate languages? There's I forget the name.
Rosetta Stone.
Rosetta Stone. Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I want to offer up throughput per constraint unit as a kind of Rosetta Stone, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this.
Well, just be careful. Here's why. When it comes to throughput constraint unit, Ellie, Henry, and I agreed it's a good teaching tool. It's in a book because it's a good teaching tool to understand how to make a throughput-based decision.
Yep.
Right. To put it in practice, it started. Alan Barnard proved it. Henry still has also taken further examples to prove it. When a constraint moves, you really got to know what you're doing to still use throughput constraint.
Okay. So
when it moves, it's tough.
Yeah, I know this argument, and I have a big problem with this argument. I would say if the constraint is moving, you have a badly managed business. And the concern should not be how do we make management decisions, it's where do we find a new CEO. So here's the example I like to use, and you've read it yourself. If you're running an airline, you subordinate decisions organization-wide, whether you recognize you're doing throughput, you know, throughput-based decision-making or not. And this isn't true in every sense, but in a general sense, what happens if you're running an airline is you subordinate decisions organization-wide to the impact they have on the yield that the airline earns on its fleet of seats.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, an airline, it just has a fleet of seats. And this is why transfer pricing was introduced in the 80s. There was this recognition that the profitability of the airline directly relates to the yield we earn on those seats. There's a finite number of seats. Planes are expensive. Airport slots are hard to come by. So it's definitely a scarce resource. So, in order to maximize the profitability of the airline, we maximize. Now, the other piece to this is that we know that if the constraint shifts from the airline, from the fleet of seats, aircraft in other words, to someplace else, it has catastrophic implications for the airline. Someone's probably going to get fired. Someone senior is probably going to get fired. And the classic example, the recent example of that was Southwest's reservation system going down just recently. And it doesn't matter whether it's the reservation system or the baggage handlers or the availability of crew. When the constraint shifts somewhere other than the fleet of aircraft, it has catastrophic implications for the profitability of the airline. So airlines don't ask the question, how do we manage when the constraint shifts to baggage handlers? That would be a silly question to entertain. The question they ask is, what measures do we have to take to ensure that under no circumstances do we have a plane land and have no baggage handlers to unload the baggage? Now, if an airline can do it and does do it consistently, with surprise, all of the airlines do a surprisingly good job of maintaining their fleet of aircraft as the constraint, and they do it consistently, and they have hell to pay if they screw up. Then why can't every business do it?
Well, here's the examples where it's brought up is it could be an A-type plant or a multi capability machining environment, okay, where all orders do not have the same flow through the plant. Okay.
But why are we talking about the plant? So in the TOC world, whenever we talk about constraints, we talk about the plant, but we never stop to ask, is the system, if we think of the business as a system as a whole, is the business plant constrained, or is it R&D constrained, or?
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes time to operation,
if the constraint is in the engineering department, let's say, or if the constraint is in the R&D department because it's 3M and they innovate for a living, then it doesn't make sense to have a conversation about where the constraint is in the plant because the plant is unconstrained.
But I got to take you back to throughput per constraint unit. When you say that, I'm making the assumption, maybe invalid, about the throughput that plant is going to generate making that product, right? So the environment, to be more succinct than I'm talking about, is when a product's going through a plant, and not every product needs every operation, right? And unfortunately, too many companies have been leaned or think lean, right? Where they level capacity. There isn't a lot of quote unquote excess capacity. So, without the proper managing of the flow, the constraint can move if you're going to make a throughput per constraint calculation.
I agree.
very limited environment, what I just described.
So to adopt that example, if we say yes, the business is plant constraints, which means the constraint is a resource within the plant, the constraint of the entire enterprise is a resource within the plant, then I guess the question is, different mixes of product might cause the constraint to be a different resource within the plant. But then the question is it in the best interest of the organization to be consistently selling different mixes of product? Or are they selling different mixes of product because the sales team is running around flogging whatever they think is going to earn them the most commission that day?
Yes, yes, and yes. Again, those are capacity related questions more than their throughput questions, right? Throughput is part of but it's if you take this order, what does it do to the capacity? Will something become a constraint, right?
Yeah.
The most ideal environment is, your plant so well, you're going to pick one area. This will be our capacity constrained resource. Right?
So I can imagine, I've heard this argument before, and I can imagine plant constrained businesses where different mixes of product would cause the constraint to reside at a different resource within the plant. But then whenever I increase my aperture and I think, okay, what's a practical example of that? The example that springs to mind right now talking to is Zara, the clothing manufacturer. So what they do is they watch the clothes that are on the runway, the runways in, the major shows, and they copy them. And they have people sitting there and they take photographs of them, and they'll be in the plant making those clothing like the very next day, and they'll have them in stores a few days later. Extraordinarily agile. So you could say, well, in that case, we don't have salespeople going and talking to customers. The whole business model of Zara is to copy whatever the world's leading designers put on the runway. But then the question I would ask is Zara really plant constrained?
No,
it's not. It's supply chain
constrained. Let me back this up a little bit. I've never visited a manufacturing or worked with a manufacturing company where the constraint was not the market.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's always right. Now, I've been in a complaint where clearly the constraint to the flow has not been manufacturing examples, like engineering is at oftentimes because they control the whole environment, right? And highly engineered projects.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing gets released, nothing gets approved, nothing gets quoted without engineering's involvement. That's an example I've seen numerous times, right? But ultimately, it's always the market.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. So I've seen Alan Bernard's simulations and so on, and I agree with you absolutely. In most cases, organizations that we work with have, particularly manufacturers, they have tons of capacity. If they say they're busy, they're running 2 shifts, and they still have another shift that they could be running. And I think if you talk to experienced operations people in the TOC world, and they get tired of the continuous pontificating over the location of the constraint. And I've heard Sanjeev and others, and even Ellie, I think, just tie the damn rope somewhere.
Yeah.
So
he said, if it's not the right rope, you'll know soon enough. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. If I go into a cabinet shop and they want to have a discussion about where's the constraint, I say, guys, it's the paint line.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, it's the paint line.
Always. Yeah.
Like, let's just assume it's a paint line. If it turns out that it's not, we can recalibrate at some point in the future. But if it's chaotic out there, let's just assume it's the paint line. It probably should be the paint line. The other thing is, I feel that in the TOC community, particularly among new entrants, and I think we don't discourage this enough, is that the quest for the constraint becomes almost a quest for the Holy Grail. And I don't think it should be, let's go into the plant and find it. It should be, let's consider the economics of the business and determine which resource should be fully loaded at all times.
Yeah, everybody's looking for Herbie.
Yeah, if you went into an airline business in a third world country and the business was chaotic, you wouldn't say, look, let me go and spend a week walking around operations to see if I can figure out where the constraint is. I would say, no, your job is to keep those damn planes in the air and to keep the seats full and to maximize the yield that you earn on every seat. And I think in many cases, you go into a business, it's bloody obvious what the constraint should be.
Yeah.
So the point I want to make, I just want
sorry.
to finish the point about throughput per constraint unit. The reason I think it's much more powerful than maybe a lot of folks don't recognize is that throughput per constraint unit, well, let me back up. We agreed before that profitability is a function, or profitability is the difference between the rate at which an organization generates throughput and the rate at which it accrues operating expenses. A metaphor for that is a guy running up a down elevator. The elevator's going down, that represents operating expense.
Escalator, you mean? Yeah.
Escalator,
yeah.
Now,
that's good exercise, but that's it.
The reason I love throughput per constraint unit is it models the elevator. So the organization has all of these operating costs. What do the operating costs buy? They buy capacity. It doesn't matter whether it's machines or whether it's an HR department or whether it's toilet paper in the executive washroom. Every dollar in operating expense is buying capacity. And the capacity takes the form of, if we want the organization to be productive and therefore generate profit, the capacity takes the form of constraint units. And therefore, the profitability of the business is a function of how efficiently we use those constraint units or throughput per constraint unit.
And the ideal situation is if you have the right capacity constrained resource. I say that only because that's the accepted term.
Yeah.
And that you keep it there. Yeah. You know when to increase that, when to decrease it, because that affects the flow and the throughput of everything. Right.
Yeah. So
now your Czar example of fashion, that's a little bit different. That's right. That's it sounds like I know
the plant wouldn't be the constraint at all there. The supply chain is the constraint.
Yes. Yeah.
Manufacturing the product's the easy part. It's shipping it from manufacturing locations to hundreds of stores.
Yeah. My suggestion to all those retail outlets would be in the store, the constraint should never be collecting cash.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would not have the patience of people that shop regularly for those lines, especially in those high volume clothing stores. I just wouldn't do it. Right.
Yeah.
And they're going to lose it. That's what makes online shopping even more attractive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those stores can't. Bonobos, which Walmart bought, is an interesting example. It's men's clothing, and they have guide stores. So they have stores in all the fancy shopping centers. You can go in there, you can try clothes on, but you can't buy them. I think Apple stores the same, although I think they do have inventory in Apple. Yeah, they have inventory in Apple stores, but Bonobo stores have no inventory. If you try something on and you like it, they place the order on an iPad and it gets delivered to you 2 or 3 days later. So I agree. I think those types of businesses can't continue to exist. So to tie a knot on where we started, you have this profit formula: profit equals revenue minus cost, which makes sense in retrospect, but it has no predictive power. The benefit of throughput per constraint unit.
It can if you properly understand your capacity.
Yes. Yes. But the problem is that rate doesn't appear in there anywhere.
I agree. I'm not saying it's the whole answer, but if you really understand your capacity and how the flow of your capacity, how to make that most profitable.
But so once you say capacity, once you say words like capacity and flow, you're introducing time into the discussion.
Well, I'd say reintroducing flow.
Yes. Well, flow is units per hour, right? Or units per day.
Whatever the measure, but the faster.
Because cost accounting removed time from the equation.
I agree.
You said, well, let's pick a number to allocate, and we'll pick an average number, and the whole process of averaging deletes time.
I agree. That's why, again, flow,
Yeah,
speed.
all roads lead back to flow.
Yeah.
So what I'm suggesting is you replace profit equals revenue minus cost with profit is proportional to throughput per constraint unit.
It can be when you got a manageable constraint unit, right?
Ah,
That
good,
just,
good, good. I'm glad you said it can be, because that's the next interesting thing is what's the it's not always true because the constraint might move. So, and I think that you know what, I criticized the young entrants to the TOC community and even some older ones who should know better for this quest for the Holy Grail. Find Herbie, as you said. But if you think about the the the, the so as a consequence, all these people have a fear of the constraint moving. What if the constraint moves? Whereas I would argue that in a well-managed business, the constraint moving should be a very unlikely proposition. And if it became likely that the constraint is going to move, there should be warning bells everywhere.
anybody who understands flow and constraints would agree. No one would disagree with that.
Yeah. I had a conversation with Sanjeev, and I asked him the question, throughput per constraint unit is great for making management decisions up until the point where the dynamics of the organization changes because the constraint moves. And I said, how do you avoid a decision that tips the organization into a new state, that causes a constraint to move? And his initial answer, which I think is a great answer, was you don't, because pretty much every organization has tons of excess capacity, and it just doesn't happen. So I pushed him and I said, well, if you keep making decisions iteratively using throughput per constraint unit, eventually you must reach a point where the constraint's going to move. And I forced him to think about it, which I could tell he was trying not to do because he didn't have much truck with the whole conversation. But then he said, oh, well, it'd be visible as buffer penetration. And I'm like, of course
Say that again. What did he say?
it would be visible as buffer penetration.
Oh,
So when you're watching so for those people who don't know the term, in the TOC world, you have a resource that's a constraint, and in order to protect it, to ensure it's fully activated at all times, you build a buffer of work upstream from it.
yeah.
And the purpose of the buffer is to absorb all of the upstream variability in all the upstream resources, including the market. And you monitor what's called buffer penetration, which is the amount of the buffer that gets constrained by jobs or whatever that are arriving at the buffer. So if you're in a position where you've increased volume and you're reaching a point where you have insufficient protective capacity somewhere in the organization, it would show up as a whole bunch of buffer penetration in the red, where it would normally be in the yellow, let's say. So that's an awesome answer, but both of his answers are valid.
Well, that's how in a DBR environment, that's how the CCR is managed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
The other realization, or the other thing that Sanjeev said, again, without considering it, like this whole conversation was him trying not to have the conversation. The other thing that he pointed out is that if decisions made using throughput per constraint unit in order to make predictions are reversible, and it transpires that you made a decision that it has endangered the constraint, then you simply reverse the decision. So the idea is you say to managers throughout the organization, instead of using local profit estimation based upon cost accounting, we want you to make decisions using throughput per constraint unit as a way of making predictions about the profit implication of the decisions that you're making. And we want you to avoid using this for decisions that involve major changes, acquisitions, capital, purchase of new equipment, but those decisions aren't made locally anyway. So for business as usual type decisions, if we say You can use throughput per constraint unit in order to make predictions to as a basis for your decisions, as long as the decisions you make using throughput per constraint unit are reversible. So if a customer says, I want a 15% discount if I promise to buy 200 units a month, you can say, yes, you can have that discount, but it's month to month. We're not going to sign a 5-year contract.
Interesting. Obviously, your mind immediately goes to how's the customer going to react to that? I'm willing to make a large commitment, but you're not willing to make a large commitment back. So,
Yeah, so I would say if the customer comes back and says, I want a 5-year commitment, then I think throughput per constraint unit can only be used to make decisions where we don't realistically expect the constraint to move. If we're making a decision where we expect the constraint to move, the customer wants a 5-year commitment to a huge volume, or we're considering a major purchase, a divestiture of a business or an acquisition of another business, or some major decision. Those decisions should obviously be made in a different setting, and there should be a proper analysis. And my argument would be we should have a model of the organization that enables us to do scenario analysis. So let's plug this in and run the scenario. You don't need cost accounting to make those kind of decisions. And you could use cost accounting principles in order to construct a model of the organization, but why would you?
No, you wouldn't. No, it's all throughput based.
Yeah, just
Delta
build a model in Excel. Build a model that captures the dynamics of the organization and use it to support major decisions, and then trivial day-to-day decisions make them using throughput per constraint unit. And if you can't, because the constraint shifts every Thursday to a new location, then figure out why is the organization chaotic and fix that problem.
Again, it's very, when I have this discussion with people, Justin, one example comes up, and it's a real life example of mine. It was a commercial printer, right? Primarily boxes, not paper. So different, not corrugated cardboard, but everything, cereal box, jewelry boxes, candy boxes, right? But high volume. Why am I here? Well, we talked to a guy about TOC years ago. He helped us a little bit. We're intrigued. Somebody told us about you. You're here. Can you help us? I said, okay. So we had a fairly quick discussion. You guys are pretty good. They tell me how good they are. Yeah, we're pretty good. Define good. Define good is that when there's a process to get an order accepted, right? They're not going to call and just say, can you print this cereal box for them? You have to be an approved vendor process to go through, right? So ABC company says, okay, I need 10,000 of these cereal boxes. I said, so, they placed the order. How'd you get it out? Well, yeah, we're pretty good. We're at industry best norm, not best, but we're at industry. It's 2 weeks. We can ship that 10,000 boxes. Okay. All right. So I say, say that same customer calls. You've heard this question before. They need 10,000 boxes. They need it as soon as possible. They're a good customer. You're going to go out to your plant and say, look, we're going to release this order. When it comes to you, you stop doing what you're doing, process the order, then go back to do what you're doing, right? And the order goes through the plant and do that. I said, how long does it take? I said, we take the order in the morning, we could have it on the truck the next morning.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So now when they say 2 weeks, they literally meant 10 production days, right? I clarified that. All right. Okay. So you have 9 days of excess capacity. They look at me like I'm nuts, right? I said, well, you do. I said, just think about what you said. So anyway, that led to, I tell you that to tell you about, we got to manage capacity. But in their printing area, huge printers. I'm sure you've seen them.
Yeah.
4 older ones and then 5 newer ones, right? So where's the CCR? So there, it became useless to try to, we put in the the TOC-based inherent simplicity DVR software there, right? It didn't matter where the CCR was, right? There was 9 presses, for God's sakes, right? It became all about flow, right?
Yeah.
Keeping that, we wanted every order done in 7 days, but not shipped for 14. We weren't going to give away that 7-day premium, right? You understand what I mean? So they ended up doing that. But to try to find the actual CCR and pay attention, we got capacity out by definition. These large printing presses, there's excess capacity everywhere.
I think that in a lot of cases, it comes back to this spinning wheels trying to find Herbie. In the case of a printer, and I know the printing business pretty well, I think in many cases, if you have a bunch of similar presses, it makes sense to say the constraint is the press room. In other words, treat a set of resources as if it were a single resource. I don't think it makes sense to try and tie the rope or to make decisions with respect to a single printing press.
Oh, they didn't. They never. They did. They could run any order in any machine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
exactly. Treat the press room as the constraint, and then for making management decisions. And then you may make scheduling decisions independently within the press room. But I think in the TOC world, a lot of folks default to the plant. And I think this is why Ellie had a tendency to talk about the constraint being in the market anytime the constraint wasn't in the plant. Because Ellie's formulation of the organization traditionally was we have the plant and then we have everything else, and we call it the market. There was a resistance, I think, initially, which isn't there to the same extent, to identifying a constraint anywhere outside of production, which doesn't make sense because in some organizations, engineering is clearly the constraint. In some organizations, like 3M, for example, R&D is obviously the constraint. So I've always had a top-down view of the organization because I'm not a production manager. I would rather start at the top of the organization and say what process, of the various significant processes that exist within this organization, which of them constrains flow, and then within those processes, which is the constraint.
Have you seen the Elon Musk example of the one thing?
Yeah, I think I have. I'm not sure exactly what comment you're referring to. Actually, Mark Andreessen did a fantastic interview. It was either with Lex or with Joe Rogan, where he basically explained Elon Musk's approach to solving problems, and it could have been a description of TOC. And he said he goes in and he asks, "What's the one thing that's preventing you from shipping?" Or
my
whatever.
friend Alan actually turned it into a class.
Yeah,
and that got some recent publicity, right? So he goes in there, what's the one thing, and that's where the management focus is.
Yeah, Andreessen talked about how he was answering a question someone asked, and he said you could break down Musk's ability to do superhuman things into a very simple formula. You build these businesses that have a huge mission. You give, as long as the laws of physics don't prohibit it, you give the management team what appears to be a completely unachievable goal to strive for. And then you go and visit with them once a week and you ask them what's impeding your progress. And he uses the power of his intellect to do a deep dive onto that one thing. And then leaves them alone to go and find a fix for it, and comes back in a week's time and repeats the process. Interesting thing, another Musk story. I listened to, he did a meeting for his internal people that was on YouTube, and he's talking about how the upcoming robotaxi, which is a simplified simplified car. It doesn't have a steering wheel or anything. The plan is to make it from two castings that get bolted together, basically. It's not even painted. The dye is added to the plastics and they don't even bother to paint them. But his goal is to increase the flow to the point where they can produce a robo-taxi one every 5 seconds. That's the rate at which he believes they can come off the assembly line. In other words, he's done the math and he's convinced that the laws of physics will allow Tesla to produce robo-taxis at the rate of one every 5 seconds.
From raw material to finished product? Whatever or component parts to finished product, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Including cost.
I was told by a consultant who visited Boeing a lot that Boeing could assemble a 747 back in the day, right, in 72 hours.
Yeah.
If they wanted to. It's been done.
Well, they have I was there. I did a tour, and I think they had 32,000 people working in a single shift.
Wow. I want to talk about management nightmare. My God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a well-trained workforce. It's got to be. You hope it is.
So, we haven't disagreed on as much as I hoped we would. I thought if we can find some stuff to disagree on, it's going to make the conversation spicy.
Well, no. It doesn't surprise me, especially I haven't got through your whole book, but I got through most of it, plus what you published leading up to this, So, look, I started in this path a long time ago, right? And I just been slowly going at it, and I took a long path, too long, much longer than you did, right? I mean, I started with that division leader, and it's got to be a better way. So I looked at cost accounting and management accounting and process. That led me, I went to a conference in Boston. The guy who basically presented his world tour thesis on activity-based costing, ABC, right? Bob Kaplan's credited with it, but my guy is the guy who actually led the team. Kaplan's the one who got the academic credit for it. Anyway, so I took that route. And then it's a process route where I was being instructed process from a quality point of view, where the instructor asked everybody in the class if they read the goal, and no one had. And he says, well, you ought to read it. Right. So that was my start. Right. And I read it. To me, it was not an epiphany. I read it and it made a lot of sense, but I didn't know how to translate it to my clients. Right. It was too simple.
Yeah.
It was too simple. So
yes.
Now I can do it, years later, a lot of mistakes and a lot of false starts. The one thing we haven't talked about, Justin, is I'm a big believer in this, right? Is that especially since the finance accounting reasons are never going to go away, right? So those numbers are always going to exist.
Yes.
Right. So, Henry calls it the most important chapter in our book. It's the building a bridge chapter, right? Yeah. So when you're converting people to the throughput world, you can't just say, hey, this way's better, use my way, right? You gotta take them on the path of this is what you're using now, this is where we're going to get to, and here's the differences you're going to understand in between. So it's not you're not fighting. That's step one. Step two, so long as those old measurements remain in place. And now when I say measurements, I mean the measurements that affect people's reviews, whether it's individual or their division or their product line, whatever. Those meant that affect those reviews and then subsequently impact their compensation, you're going to lose that battle every time. If those measurements are still there and they conflict through the throughput-based measurements you're trying to do, you may win while you're there. As soon as you're gone.
Yeah, I would argue that they need to be there. And I think that the finance departments should probably be doing more forensic accounting. And if we're examining the past to figure out what isn't working historically, I have no problem whatsoever with cost allocation because the past has already happened. The profit equals revenue minus cost formula works perfectly if we're talking about the past. It only fails when we make the assumption the two variables are independent, which they're clearly not if we're talking about the future. But if we're talking about the past, they are independent. It's already happened. Nothing's going to change.
I don't disagree, but then they use that going forward. That's their forward look as well.
Yeah. So
if they do a forecast, what's going to be based? It's going to be based on history.
Yep. Yep. But that's the only point where we have, and I mean, I think I've talked to a number of both accounting people and also finance people, as in private equity, and shared this article and had conversations with them. What I'm finding is it's very easy to get them to agree that every management decision is underpinned by a prediction of some kind.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees with that. And then when you ask them, what is your opinion of the predictive power of profit equals revenue minus cost, where costs are calculated using whatever method, then it's so easy to get people to agree that that formula cannot be used to predict the future.
Say that again. It's so easy.
It's so easy to get folks to agree that profit equals revenue minus cost has very low predictive power.
Okay. I want to make sure I understood.
It does a very poor job of modeling. It fails to model the dynamics of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. By the way, you mentioned the word the private equity industry. They're really missing the boat. They're really missing a boat, and it's measurable. Measurable. Look at all the private equity acquisitions where they acquired private businesses, and they come in and do their thing, and they ruin them all, and they bankrupt these once profitable companies. I know some strong ones around here, and they've used me a little bit, but they had this model of, we're going to buy it, we're going to make it more efficient, we're going to flip it in 5 to 7 years, and it's all cost world thinking. They don't do what I did with the printer and say you've got 9 days of excess capacity. They don't do that. I told them you can do that. I got people who, I don't do that anymore. I got people who do that for you.
I think the private equity people should be the easiest to convince because on the one hand, they view the business like an economist views a business rather than like an accountant views a business. The problem is once they get a business, they hand over the day-to-day management decisions to cost accountants.
And it's all cost world management.
It is. It is.
Very hard line, by the way. Very hard.
So, I've spoken to some accountants, not professional accountants, but in-house accountants, who are just so stuck in the cost paradigm, it's impossible to communicate. I just can't get them to agree or to admit that the notion of unit profitability, if we're talking about the future, makes no sense. They're so stuck on and a part of the problem is the use of this term gross profit rather than contribution margin. I hate the fact that the term gross profit even exists because gross profit is not any kind of profit. It's
I agree.
got nothing to do with profit.
Yeah.
But at least the private equity people, they understand how to view the business from an investor's perspective, which should make it easier to sell. I mean, I've had a number of private equity people read the paper that Ode to Speed was based on, and I haven't had a single negative response.
That's good. That's encouraging.
Like one of them said his son is at MIT currently, and he showed it to his son, and his son is thinking about using it as a basis for his dissertation. which was a nice, which was a
That's a
nice,
nice compliment. Yeah.
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 So let me finish on one thing. Let's go
Okay.
from the theory to the execution, and we might disagree on this. So obviously, in the TOC world, I think Ellie discovered that if we go into a chaotic project environment, it's useful to have a short-term kind of pattern interrupt to settle the environment down. And choke the release is, of course, that pattern interrupt. Just choke the release of projects. Or not even choke the release, sorry. It's in a project environment, it's deactivate a whole bunch of projects. Freeze. It's freeze, sorry. Freeze a bunch of projects
Yeah.
until the environment ceases to be chaotic. And then from that point on, it's one out, one in. My sort of version of that I'm arguing for is if you go into an organization where decisions are being made on the basis of trying to maximize efficiencies, department by department, rather than trying to sell them on this whole approach to management decision making that probably is not profitable, but it's probably is not possible because the whole organization is going to be chaotic. So making decisions on the basis of throughput per constraint unit, the organization is not ready for that. It doesn't look anything like the airline example. So what I'm proposing to do, and what we are doing with some organizations, is to say, instead of optimizing department by department for efficiency, we're going to optimize department by department for speed. And what that means is if you have 10 people in your department, instead of trying to keep those 10 people consistently busy every day, what we want is for those 10 people to come to work and stand idle waiting for someone to hand a task to them. And when someone hands a task to them, we want them to sprint to complete it. And at the point at which they get the task, we want to start a stopwatch, and we want to stop the stopwatch when they finish, and we want to publicize how long it took for them to complete that task. So a relay racer behavior, as we would say, or what I'm calling the pit crew behavior, the Formula One pit crew behavior. So I'm suggesting when we start on this journey with an organization, the first step on the journey is to go department by department, get rid of the pursuit of efficiency and replace it with the pursuit of speed, and leave everything else unchanged.
That is well said. Do you think you differentiated at all from Ellie's Roadrunner concept? That's how Ellie would describe Roadrunner.
Yes.
If you're not working on something that needs to be done, sit there and do nothing.
Yep.
When it comes to you, do it as fast as possible, pass it along to the next step.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So relay racer, roadrunner, it's the same behavior you see in fire depots. You know,
yep.
if they're not putting out fires, they're cleaning the engine or playing volleyball. They are idle, waiting for someone to give them a unit of work. Otherwise, it would take. If the building caught on fire, we rang the fire brigade. They'd tell us that they'd put us in a queue and they'd be with us in 6 hours.
Right. Yeah. So again, there's nothing to disagree there.
Because Sanjeev's point, which I agree with, is that in order to avoid the catastrophic effects of, I mean, I'm arguing that most businesses are chaotic because the constraint is moving, but they don't feel chaotic for the most part. They do, some of them do, but they don't feel chaotic for the most part because there's massive amounts of protective capacity. We used to see this in manufacturing plants. In between every workstation was a pile of, were there trolleys with piles of work on it. Nowadays, that doesn't exist to the same degree, but most of our clients are knowledge work organizations, at least in part. And where knowledge work is concerned, if you visualize work in progress, there are piles of work everywhere, just as bad, if not worse, than what we used to see in production environments.
Yep.
So the problem is if you manage your department for efficiency, you hide all that excess capacity. But if you adopt the Roadrunner methodology, the excess capacity becomes visible because we have people sitting idle all day.
Yeah. A lot of times size hides that, large companies, it's the normal way to operate. So because it's normal, it's financially supported because that's.
And if they don't have zero-based budgeting, they need to,
Yeah.
they don't want to give any back because next year they want to argue for more.
Right. On efficiency, by the way, I stole a term from years ago that I caught at a TOC conference. You can't deposit percentage points.
Yeah. Yep. I said that. You can't bank percentages. You can only bank dollars.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I understand. It's all, our president is actually pretty smart on how he words things. So I don't know who came up with the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, but I just cringed when I heard that.
Howard Lutnick came up with it purportedly.
Who's he?
Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary.
Oh, that was it. Okay, now I know who you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
So efficiency. You can get real good at making crap, So efficiency. That all started. Again, I don't know. Remember the ISO? You probably know the ISO standards, right?
Yeah.
So there was a time way back when where I think it was an academic. It wasn't in real life, obviously, proved and passed an ISO certification to make cement-based life jackets.
Okay.
All the procedures are properly followed.
For the mafia?
Didn't matter for who. But the point was, there's got to be some reason to, just because I followed every step, who's going to buy it? Right? Yeah. So that ISO realized they had to tune it up. They had to make themselves practical. It's not just about following rules. It has to mean something too. I say it's related to efficiency. Efficient. I don't know what that means. Again, you can't deposit percentage points.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with a business being efficient. If I said, Rocco, your business is capital efficient, that's a compliment. And we'd both be happy about that, right?
Yeah.
But that's a global measurement.
I knew I had meant it. But I would also say, let me see the measurement. And then I'll let you know if I agree.
Well, like a capital efficient business is probably a profitable business, but you don't get a capital efficient business by making every department efficient.
Never.
Amazon's a capital efficient business,
yes.
But Amazon does not optimize division by division.
No, speed to customer, right?
Yep. They optimize for speed.
Yeah, they sure do. And it's again, a normal person looks. I've had a discussion with people in that warehouse they're building 15 miles from me. It's to the normal person, it's counterintuitive. How is that going to increase speed? It's massive. Just like I said, it's their second largest in the country, right? Just incredible. Just outside of Niagara Falls.
The pit stop, in the little book that you're reading, I used the mandate to reduce fuel cost as a example of cost-based decision making, but the example I'm writing in the script for the video that I'm working on, I came up with a second Formula One based example, and that is that if you look at the pit stop in Formula One, there are 22 pit crew members. And there are as few as 4 pit stops in a race. 2 cars, 2 stops each. Now there could be more than 4 stops, but there are as few as 4 stops in a race. So you have 22 people who are present for the entire race, and their job is, do you know how long an average pit stop takes?
Seconds, I know that.
2 seconds.
2 seconds?
2 seconds.
Incredible.
So
I don't know if my son is really into it. But that number 4 surprised me just from the point of view of, I once took a mini tour at Indy, and how the frequency that they have to change tires, amazing, because they're so soft, so they grab the road. I'm really surprised it's only 4.
I think they've really cranked it down. There's limitations. They're not allowed to refuel Formula One cars anymore. But yeah, I was surprised by that. I had to get Grok to help me with that one. But yeah, it's no less than two, I believe.
Wow.
It could be more. But the the scenario I came up with, and it's a ridiculous scenario, is imagine you hired a young MBA graduate and you had them go through a Formula One team that was, let's say it wasn't as profitable as its owners would like it to be, to try and figure out how to make it more profitable. The the pit operations would be a lucrative place to focus. You have 22 people collectively working for or working for now, obviously it takes time to prepare for a pit stop and it takes time to clean up after a pit stop. But even if we said it was 15 minutes per pit stop, and it couldn't be much more than 15 minutes because on the occasion that they have to do more than four, they need to turn them around quickly so they're ready for the next one, presumably. Two cars on the track.
Yep.
So if we
Yep.
said 15 minutes from the start of prep to the finish of cleanup, we've got 22 people working for 60 minutes. That would be a ripe opportunity for efficiency improvement. A ripe opportunity.
Sure
Now
would.
I've met some MBAs who weren't as smart as you might expect them to be, but I don't think I've ever met someone who would be so stupid as to suggest that we reduce the size of the pit crew from 22 people to maybe 4 or 5 people.
So
But
that I will tell you because they know what the ultimate measurement is.
yes, lap time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's evident. You
yeah,
don't got to be an expert.
yeah.
Right.
So that scenario is utterly preposterous.
Yeah.
For even someone who doesn't understand Formula One, even someone who doesn't understand business or accounting, it's utterly preposterous. However, that's exactly the type of decision that we see being made in the types of organizations we visit every single day of the week.
You're aware that Southwest Airlines back in the day, that's what they did? They went and studied pit crews
Oh, I didn't. Yeah,
to
because
reduce
they actually had a
the
15-minute turn, which is when I suggested 15 minutes, I suggested 15 minutes thinking about the Southwest Airlines 15-minute turnaround on planes.
Okay. Yeah. The original president who made him, he wrote a book.
Yeah, I read it.
He told a story about we need to think out of the box. Who's doing best practices on turning vehicles around, right?
Yeah,
They went and studied pit crews. That's what they
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Went around the world studying pit crews. And that's I remember one time I was somewhere in the Midwest and I was waiting for a Southwest plane. It was late and they promised to get us out on time. I said, well, I got to go see this, right? My plane landed. I went out and went and looked at it. It was like a pit crew. That
Yeah.
plane was surrounded by maintenance people and luggage people.
Yep.
Double, triple what you don't expect. They brought extra people at the gate to get people out of the plane and then into the plane to clean it, right? My plane left on time.
Here's another example of the same thing. We talked about Amazon before. I live on Magnolia Boulevard, which is a fairly busy street in the valley here in Los Angeles. And every now and again, I'll get a notification from Amazon to say that a parcel that I'm waiting for is in the process of being delivered. And they give you a little map and you can see it moving towards you. So I'll go and I'll wait out the front of my house. And every time I do that, what amazes me is as I look up and down the street, it's a big street, 4 lanes. There's cars pulling up, delivering Amazon parcels up and down the street. And some of them are private vehicles. And you know it's Amazon parcels because they're pulling Amazon boxes out of the back seats or out of the trunk. And some of them are those little blue Amazon vans. But they haven't tried to batch them together. You know, anyone else would say we're going to have 2 daily deliveries to Magnolia to Sherman Oaks. But the cars are just pulling up and dropping parcels, and a car will pull up, drop 2 parcels, drive off, and then a truck will pull up, drop 4 parcels to the house next door, and that goes on all day long.
Amazon's been to my house 3 times a day, numerous times.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why. When I buy something on Amazon, I'll get a choice. Do you want to use your Prime and you'll get it in 2 days, or they got a name for it. You want it on Amazon Ship Day,
Yeah.
right? And my answer is, well, I paid for Prime.
Yes.
Ship it to, right?
Yeah, I've often
They
wondered why they
haven't
give you that
offered
choice. Would you like it slower? It costs the same.
they haven't offered me a premium Prime price to encourage me to use the Amazon Ship Day. Most
Yeah.
stuff I order isn't time sensitive. So I would take the once a week Amazon Ship Day
Yeah.
if that Prime cost was lower. I'm surprised they haven't done that yet.
The interesting thing that, and I don't have any inside information, but my observation is that the interesting thing about Amazon's logistics is they haven't actually invented anything. All they've done is emulated the delivery service that currently mechanics and body shops have. So if you're a mechanic and someone brings you a car, you do a you take a quick look at it, you figure out what parts are required, and you get on the phone or get on the internet now and you request those parts, and those parts get delivered the same day by
Oh,
most.
that service. I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
now there's a name for the people. They're jobbers or something. There's actually a name for the companies that do that. There's tons of companies. In fact, we worked with America's largest distributor of paint and panel inputs, and they sold through. I'm pretty sure it's called a jobbing or jobbers network, and a whole bunch of independent operators drive around and deliver that stuff. And all Amazon has done is replicated that, except for day-to-day products rather than, bumpers and brake calipers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The Grainger and Fastenal secured a huge win with vendor managed inventory, and the great thing about VMI is you don't have to ask how long it's going to take because we delivered it yesterday. So it's hard to beat yesterday. So you would think that Grainger and Fastenal have a impossible lead over Amazon, but actually, if your delivery speed gets fast enough, you actually take away the benefit of vendor managed inventory.
How so?
Well, um, 3 hours can't beat yesterday. 20 minutes possibly could.
You really think Amazon would relinquish that kind of control to their vendors?
What do you mean?
Well, vendor managed inventory.
No, I'm saying no. I'm saying that Fastenal and Grainger competes with Amazon using vendor managed inventory, and they beat Amazon because yesterday is faster than 3 hours. So
Are you saying how? Are their vendors shipping direct to their customers?
no. So
How are they
Grainger,
doing
yeah,
that?
yes. So Grainger and Fastenal will maintain inventory on customers' premises on a consignment basis. You buy it when you buy it when you consume it.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's faster than Amazon, right? Because it's delivered before you need it. If your grinder breaks, you go to a locker, you key in your PIN code, and you pull out a
Yeah.
new grinder, and you go back to work. But you pay a premium, a fairly significant premium for vendor managed inventory. What my
Well,
point is,
they try that with consumers, right? So that's in a plant, and that's been around for. I call it the vending machine inside
yes,
in the plant, right? Fastenal is a vending machine. You go
yeah,
as the Fastenal guy shows up next week. Whatever you consume, they bill you for, right? They the first attempt at that got to be over 10 years ago. Was with those RFID tags.
yeah. Well, electricity sold like that, right? You charge for
Well,
it
here's
when
my
it comes out
point.
of the wall.
So my carton of milk had an RFID tag,
Yeah,
right? So the theory was, I do all my shopping at Walmart, and especially my consumables throughout my house had RFID tags.
yeah.
All Walmart's got to do is drive down the street, and they're going to ship me what's empty. Right? They couldn't get past the personal privacy issues. It killed it dead in the tracks.
Yeah. So the point that I was making is that that um, if we just think B2B for a moment, if
Yeah.
Fastenal
Okay.
delivers the day before beats
I
twice
agree.
daily
Oh, no,
delivery.
no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But my point is, if Amazon decreases their lead time, you get to a point where you don't really need to have it the day before. If Amazon can get it to you in 10 minutes, why would you pay the premium for Fastenal to deliver it the day before if Amazon can deliver it in 10 minutes?
Yeah.
So I think that's the Amazon strategy to
Is
get.
Fastenal getting a premium?
Oh, yes.
They
A
are.
huge premium. Yeah.
That surprises me.
Yeah.
Like I know corrugated manufacturers who think about this. They put capabilities inside their large corrugated users with raw material and corrugated machines to make their own boxes.
Yeah.
That creates stickiness. Now they got a custom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look how painful it would be to replace that vendor,
Yeah.
right? But they don't charge a premium for that.
Why not?
Right? They just why? I don't know. That's a good question. That's a good question. At least
That
I should say they did tell me they did. They just had the move to they now have 100% of the corrugated business forever was the premium they got.
they're
That was
supplying the
it.
machine. They're supplying the machine. They have to pay for the machine.
Yep.
Presumably, they don't get anywhere near the yield out of the machine operating in the customer's plant than they would if they were operating it in their own plant. Because if they're operating in their own plant, they could run it 3 shifts a day, whereas the customer's going to use it only when they want it. So the customer has to pay a premium because they need to recover the cost of the machine and the raw material. It might be that they're not making a higher unit.
These are people who are making corrugated every day, right? These are high volume shop.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not
Okay.
right. So, and they trust me, their customers consider them a commodity. They're not
Yeah.
going to pay a premium for a commodity. That's I it's years since I
So the
visited that
markup on
company.
so I think Fastenal were the first to do vendor managed inventory. The markup on fasteners, we've worked with some organizations that compete with Fastenal. So specialty fasteners have massive markups on them. Um, I don't know exactly what margin. I guess you could probably read an annual report and figure it out. Um, but I've worked with many frustrated industrial supply companies who are arguing that they can offer meaningfully cheaper prices to MRO shops and manufacturers, but they can't get in because Fastenal or Granger has the whole premises locked up with VMI, and it's extremely sticky.
Yeah, it's
So you
painful.
might be able to sell toilet paper at half the price, but they're not
So here's what
interested in
they
having a conversation with you about toilet paper.
here's what they have to hope for, right? Did you read It's Not Luck?
Yeah.
All right. The office supply distributor, that was the solution, right? They put a cabinet in your office. They kept full of supplies you
Yeah.
use in your office. They came by once a week. They replenished it and they billed you for whatever you used the previous week,
Yeah.
right? That was the successful model. I don't know if you ever met Patrick Holschmidt.
I
He's
did
a
not.
TOC guy. He's from the Netherlands. That was his company.
Okay.
Right? So our last conference in Las Vegas, Patrick came back after being gone a while. He actually presented with his son and some new offer that they had. But Patrick sold that company years ago. I said, Patrick, just out of curiosity, how's that company doing? Says they're out of business. They ruined it all. Says, what are you talking about? He says, well, he sold it to private equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
They came in, and after a while, they started analyzing the P&Ls and compare themselves to others in the industry, and they noticed their freight and delivery costs were way out of whack. Well, of course they were.
Yeah.
They're visiting their customers every week, right? That was the whole key to their mafia offer. That was their, you don't have to ever, and you'll never pay for more than what you consume, right? So they cut down the shipments, and customers started not having stuff in the cabinets when they needed it, right? And they lost the customers,
Yeah. I ran
right?
a
So that's
session
what they
with the procurement team from a client just last week, and I'm asking about the batch size for orders they're placing, and they're explaining to me patiently, well, we have to order in these size batches because otherwise we end up with unrealistic delivery costs. I said, so you're making procurement decisions with a view to minimizing delivery costs? And they said, yes, of course. And it took me a shockingly long time to explain to them that maybe that isn't the parameter you should be subordinating to.
I believe you had a long time discussion with that to prove that. I believe it. It's just you know that printing company I told you about.
Yeah.
So we it took a month to get them down to 7 days. It took 2 months where they could get an order out without any pain at all in 3 days. Right. So we asked, quit giving it away. Right. Their director of sales, they had not a huge sales force, sales director and maybe 5 salespeople. I said, look, you now have Mafia offer speed. Just sell that, sell the speed. You'll never convince me. And he refused to work with people that I referred him to. I didn't know you at the time. To develop Mafia offers. Just refused, right? He met once at the CEO's insistence with, did you ever meet Yaniv the few years? Yaniv Danur, the few years he worked with Global Consulting. He happened to be in the area. So we drove and met with him. I at least got him to do this. I said, okay, at least do this. Your current customers say, if you ever have a need for a rush order, we can serve you. We can put on some overtime. If you want it in 7 days, we'll charge you 10%. If you want it in 3 days, we'll charge you 25%. Just do that.
Yeah.
Right. I think those were the percentages. Don't quote me. Well, we'll do it, but they'll never go for it. They never had a month where it wasn't at least 50,000 premium dollars.
Yeah.
Right to the bottom line dollars. And to this day, that sales director still believes he can't sell speed.
Yeah.
We
have clients who, on the one hand, tell us their customers refuse to pay a premium, and on the other hand, complain about the fact that their customers insist on making last-minute decisions. And my view is we should be training them to order at the very last minute, and then we should be figuring out how to have shorter production lead times or shorter fulfillment lead times than competitors do, because then they have no choice but to pay a premium for rushed deliveries from us. Hey, I don't want to take all of your day. Could you just take a moment, Rocco, and I'll probably clip this and put it at the beginning, just to explain, just to briefly summarize your career in accounting so that folks know that you're a professional accountant, at least by trade?
Sure. I don't know. Okay, I'll give it a shot. My CV is too long. So I'm Rocco Surace. I'm by training, by that I mean in college educated, a degree in accounting. I went to a normal routine of studying the different disciplines. First, becoming a major tax person. I've spent a lot of years there. It was fun. Fun because not doing tax returns. It was fun winning audits of clients for taxes, right? Because typically, I won some large 7-figure battles. But naturally, I moved over to the accounting side. But that was kind of boring. I learned a lot, but I wasn't helping my clients. So I was continuously looking for a way.
And this is with a big firm?
No, I was never with a huge firm.
Okay.
Never with a huge firm, right? Always a local firm. But we had a lot of big companies as clients. We were a small firm, boutique firm, but we had a lot of large, not public, right? The only public work I had did consulting work for public companies, not audit and accounting work. But I kept searching for ways to help my clients better. Everything from I learned how to value businesses because, our clients needed that. Everything from buy-sell agreements to maybe they're actually selling their company, but then helping them manage it wise. So I looked at all the cost accounting paths from improved cost accounting, management accounting things that led me to the activity-based costing, activity-based management world, which led me to the process world, right? Finally, the concept was, businesses serve their customers by achieving processes, right? So there's this world out there about process improvement. What will that mean? What could that mean in developing my body of knowledge to help my clients? To eventually, I read the goal.
Mm-hmm.
One thing led to another, led to another, led to another, led to meeting Ellie Goldratt in that world and being involved. So that led to me, and from the accounting end, becoming proficient. I won't call myself an expert in anything, except when I'm on the witness stand, then I'm a paid expert. And proficient in throughput accounting. So that's been a 50-year road for the most part.
I wanted to ask so that viewers could see that you had proper accounting bona fides.
Accounting what? Sorry.
To bona fides that you're a legitimate accountant.
Oh yeah.
You were first an accountant.
I'm a CPA. I passed the exam. When I took it's still pretty high, but when I took the exam, people who took it for the first time, 90% failure rate.
Mm.
After that, 70% failure rate.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit better now, but not much. Yeah, it's very, very difficult, very, very mentally disciplined exam. You got to know your stuff. Doesn't mean you're a good accountant.
Yeah.
Just means you got to know the material.
Yeah.
So and I had that lesson early on in life too, from a client where he wanted new overhead rates to use in his construction business. And I took all his information, developed new overhead rates. And he said, "What are you trying to do? Put me out of business?" I must be doing something wrong. So, I had a lot of early lessons pointing me in this direction.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Oh, this has been really good, Rocco. My thinking is we'll make it available. I think there are going to be folks who find the conversation fascinating.
Yeah. Let me know. I'll put the links on my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So people can get to it. Okay. So,
yeah.
By the way, I might have told you this, but okay. But back when I first got into this, and I would be asked to speak on activity-based costing and measuring, and eventually throughput accounting. And my audiences were always other accountants, right? An occasional industry conference I talk at. But with the accountants, I would start off the presentation the same way every time. I brought the GAP guide with me, General Accepted Accounting Principles.
Yep.
Paperback book about this thing. And I said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have a challenge for you, right? These are the rules of our profession. We have to follow these, right? They're here for a reason, good reasons. But I'm going to pass this book around. These are the rules to ultimately prepare financial statements that meet certain standards. Anybody who can find the rule or rules, there might be more than one, I don't know, in this book that says we have to use these principles. Our clients have to use these principles to manage their companies. I'll give you $1,000.
Yeah.
And I start passing the book around. They've never heard that from anyone.
No.
Never heard that. They heard about management accounting. They never heard that.
It's laziness. We use these tools to do forensic to do forensic accounting, to find the source of problems and so on. And seeing as we have them, let's use them to make management decisions too. What could possibly go wrong?
That's very well put. Very well put. What else could go wrong? A lot. A lot.
Excellent.
Stupid decisions. All right, Justin.
Thank you so much.